Is this on? Oh my gosh. Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay. Yeah, okay. The mic's on. Okay. All right, great. Thank you. All right, well, well, anyway, good evening, everyone. I'm Julie Saylor from the Maryland Department, and welcome to the dark side of Maryland. Even though it's the third week of October, we still have plenty of spooky events coming up. On Monday, October 27th, 3 librarians from our department will present Haunted Maryland, It's Supernatural, Hun. We'll be sharing our favorite ghost stories. On Wednesday, October 29th, librarian Amanda Hughes will be presenting Witch's Brew, True Tales and Folklore of Witchcraft in Colonial Maryland. Both of these programs will also happen in this room at the same time, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. On Saturday, November 1st, I will be conducting my annual cemetery tour, Flood to the Spirit World, the Victorian Spiritualists of Greenmount Cemetery from 10 to 12 at Greenmount. I will say this, registration is full. I'm willing to put you on a waiting list. I'm going to be sending out a reminder email probably tomorrow to see if I have any people that would like to cancel. So you can talk to me after the program. And anyway, well, thank you again for coming out. So my program is Mediums and Magicians and the Ouija Board, a Spiritualist History of Baltimore. So a few things. Get comfy because this program takes a full hour. I'm happy to answer questions at the end, but a few requests. Refrain, please, from taking photographs of the slides. I had to get permission for many of these images, and there's also a lot of original research here. Most importantly, I want to state that I recognize that spiritualism is a religion for some people, and I don't intend to disrespect anyone's beliefs. When I discuss spiritualism, I will really only be reporting what was said without passing judgment or giving disclaimers. You can add those in yourself if you feel the need to. So in my work in the Maryland department, every so often I come across a photograph that intrigues me. About 5 years ago, I came across some photographs of the Demons Club of Baltimore. Well, who were the demons? I wanted to know. Definitely wanted to know after seeing that photograph. The Demons Club was a group of amateur magicians formed in Baltimore in December 1911. I discovered that Baltimore has a rich magical history that only magicians seem to know about. I began investigating some of these magicians and discovered that many magicians of this era made it their business to expose charlatans who claimed to perform actual magic rather than stage illusions. One Maryland magician, Henry Ridgely Evans, made it his mission to expose fakes. He wrote a book called The Spirit World Unmasked. This idea of exposing charlatans is a frequent theme I've encountered in researching the history of magic. And I had, whoops, sorry about that, messing around with this. Okay, so this idea of exposing charlatans is a frequent theme I've encountered in researching the history of magic, and I had a lot of questions. Who were these people, and why did magicians want to debunk them? This is where my research fell down a rabbit hole, and it brought me to some fascinating, unexpected places, and may explain why Baltimore was such a fertile ground for magician societies and even the invention of the Ouija board. So the charlatans the magicians wished to attack were the spiritualists. Spiritualism was a religious movement that had its roots in the mid-19th century. And as I began my research, it became clear that this was the lens I needed to use to make sense of the topics I cover in this program. That's why I call it a spiritualist history of Baltimore. I'll be discussing spirit mediums, magicians, and the Ouija board, and I'll be covering these from around the 1840s to about the time of the Depression from the perspective or lens of spiritualism. Remember, a lens is an optical instrument. A lens can make things clearer, but at times you may see something, but it may not actually be what you think you are seeing. So you can expect a few surprises. Most historians date the beginning of modern spiritualism to 1848, but the idea of communication with spirits is much older. The followers of Swedenborg and Universalism paved the way for the spiritualist movement in America. So I'll talk for a moment about Swedenborg. Emanuel Swedenborg was born in 1688 in Sweden. When he was 53, he began having visions of spirits, demons, and angels. And in these visions, he visited heaven, hell, and the planets. He recorded these visions in several books. Some people formed groups to study his works. In London in 1787, the first new church was established. The first new church in North America was the New Jerusalem Church of Baltimore, founded in 1792. About half a century later, Andrew Jackson Davis, the 14-year-old son of a shoemaker in upstate New York, attended demonstrations of animal magnetism. He discovered he could mesmerize himself. He began receiving messages from the spirit of Swedenborg and had visions of multiple spheres of heaven and the planets. His accounts were especially interesting to Universalists who believed in universal salvation. He was soon taken in by a Universalist minister who wrote down what Davis stated while in trance. Davis published a book, The Principles of Nature, in 1847. This book got much attention among Universalists and Swedenborgians. Months after its publication, members of the New Jerusalem Church of Baltimore had already read Davis and were discussing him. Edgar Allan Poe had actually seen one of Davis's mesmeric demonstrations. Later, Davis would be called the John the Baptist of the spiritualist movement. Davis prophesied that many more Americans would widely experience visions like his. On March 31st, 1848, less than a year after Davis's first book was published, the modern spiritualist movement began. In Hydesville, New York, 12-year-old Kate and 14-year-old Margaret Fox heard rapping or knocking, which they believed to be a ghost. The sisters believed the rappings were messages from a peddler who had been murdered in the house. The family abandoned the house and sent the sisters to Rochester to live with their older sister Leah, but the rappings continued. The first to show interest in the Fox sisters were two Quakers, Amy and Isaac Post. They believed the wrappings were proof of the afterlife. In 1850, the Fox sisters appeared at Barnum's Hotel in New York City 3 times a week. Literati such as James Fenimore Cooper, Horace Greeley, and William Cullen Bryant attended. In the media of the time, these were called the Rochester Rappings. People who read about them tried forming spirit circles, also known as seances, and discovered they also could speak directly to the dead. These people became known as spirit mediums. Some would speak while in trance, others would do writings or drawings while under control of a spirit. And by the way, a trance is an altered state of consciousness similar to a mesmeric or hypnotic state. Why were Victorians so eager to believe that they could communicate with the dead? Victorians began questioning the Calvinist idea of predestination, the idea that at birth God would assign a soul to its ultimate place in heaven or in hell. The bereaved might want to communicate with their loved ones and find reassurance that their soul has found peace in another realm. Spirit mediums filled that very real desire. With the help of spirit mediums, heaven was no longer an unknowable place. Mediums conversed with the dead and could see the conditions of the afterlife. Some believed that the spirits were urging them to construct a heaven on earth. These spiritualists allied themselves with radical movements of the time, such as feminism, abolitionism, vegetarianism, prison reform, and free love. Instead of relying on faith or belief in the Bible, spiritualism focused on what could be directly observed, on the manifestation of spirits mediated into the realm of the living. Spiritualists did not consider their religion to be occult or supernatural. They believed the phenomena they observed conformed to natural laws. Some even encouraged and participated in scientific tests of their activities. Many of the trans speakers came from upstate New York, a place of early abolitionist and feminist activity. Some of these mediums were former Universalist ministers, but many of them were women, some of them extremely young women. This was during a time when women almost never spoke in public, not even the early feminists. They were not trained by or ordained by anyone in any religion. Instead, they communicated with the dead in a direct, unmediated way. Their performances were considered to be more authentic because of their perceived youth and purity. Their physical beauty was undoubtedly also a draw as they spoke in front of mixed male and female audiences. In the 1850s, approximately 200 women traveled the country as trance speakers. So I'll show you a few mediums who visited Baltimore. The first spiritualists to visit Baltimore came in 1854 and 1855. These were Russell Perkins Ambler and Thomas Lake Harris, both former Universalist ministers who later became well-known mediums. Harris was an associate of Andrew Jackson Davis. Ambler had once toured with the Fox sisters, but became a medium himself and made appearances on his own. The first female medium to visit Baltimore was Cora Hatch, who came in December of 1856. She was born in Cuba, New York in 1840. Her family moved to a utopian community called Hopedale, also in New York. Members of this community promoted beliefs in temperance, nonviolence, and abolitionism. The parents left Hopedale to start a community of their own, and this is when Cora began to show promise as a trance medium. She began appearing publicly at the age of 15. She married 4 times, first marrying at age 16. Again, some spiritualists had radical notions about women's rights. Some would reject traditional marriage. This form of feminism was called the free love movement. Readers of the Baltimore Sun may have seen this article about Hatch's first divorce. Let me read a passage of this to you. The writer of this has been shown a list of about 40 trance-speaking mediums of both sexes who've either separated from their husbands and wives or who are living in extreme unhappiness. One who has figured in the recent free love conventions is set down as having abandoned 2 husbands, both of whom are still living, and one woman traded husbands with a sister spiritualist. Well, obviously the writer of this article believed Hatch's behavior to be scandalous. Another medium that visited Baltimore was Oxa W. Sprague. She visited Baltimore in 1858 and 1859. She was born in Vermont. At the age of 25, she was afflicted by a joint disease. The spirits cured her and began speaking through her, and she began touring as a medium. At her performances, she would speak under mesmeric influence and lecture on spiritualist principles, reassuring audiences that death was only a transition and not to be feared. She also painted while blindfolded, recited poetry, and sang, all while in communication with the spirits. She died of a recurrence of the disease at age 34. In this short time, she had earned enough money to support herself from her appearances and extensive writings. Her correspondence is preserved at the Vermont Historical Society. This is an image of her tombstone, which bears the inscription, "I still live." Not everyone was convinced by the spirit mediums. In April 1853, a man named Professor Anderson wrote the Baltimore Sun a series of 3 letters, hoping to, and this is a quote, "save his fellow creatures from the fangs of a league of impostors." He took particular aim at the Fox sisters, calling them the witches of the 19th century, suggesting that the rappings were produced by electricity, ventriloquism, or the cracking of toe joints. According to Anderson, the mediums traveled in gangs of 8 or 10 to different cities, investigating and recording recent deaths for prominent families because such information would prove useful in spiritualist lectures. Anderson closed his 3rd letter vowing, "But there is one thing I will promise you, sirs. I will not desert my cause, but will fight to the death every rapper in the Union." Remember Professor Anderson, we may be seeing him again. So these are some of the mediums that visited Baltimore during the early part of the spiritualist movement. Gradually, spiritualism lost some of its associations with the women's and abolitionist movements. The Civil War, however, actually increased public interest in spiritualism as people wanted to contact loved ones they had lost in the war. These early trance speakers acted as missionaries for the movement. Some wished to establish spiritualist churches and spiritualist conferences. Audiences wanted to see more elaborate and convincing manifestations of the spirits, and there was also more skepticism. So I'll talk about a few important figures in this later period, but first I'd like to give you an idea of the popularity of this movement. In 1861, the annual Spiritualist Register reported that there were 1,700,000 believers, 10,000 of them in Maryland. In 1870, spiritualist author and medium Emma Harding Britton estimated there were around 11 million spiritualists in the United States. By 1890, about 45,000 Americans belonged to a spiritualist congregation, though not all spiritualists would actually join a church. A recent scholarly study identified Baltimore as the second most active city in the United States for spiritualist meetings for the period 1867 to 1873. Lizzie Doughton visited Baltimore in 1863. She was a trans speaker who rejected marriage and advocated equal pay for equal work, and she would do so during her lectures. At the end of her appearance in Baltimore on January 11th, 1863, she fell into a trance and was visited by the spirit of Edgar Allan Poe. Poe dictated the poem, "The Streets of Baltimore," to her. There were also a few prominent male mediums during this period. The most famous of these were the Davenport brothers. They were known for an elaborate manifestation called the Spirit Cabinet, where the mediums would be tightly bound in a wooden cabinet with musical instruments placed in a compartment between them. Inside the darkened cabinet, spirits would play the musical instruments. The Davenports came to Baltimore in March 1864. I found an account of this visit in a spiritualist newspaper called the Banner of Light. The author of this article, Washington Danskin, was initially skeptical but came away believing in the manifestations. Washington Danskin was an important figure in Baltimore spiritualism. Danskin was a merchant from Baltimore. He was born Catholic, but converted to spiritualism around 1853 or 1854. He started a church called the First Spiritualist Congregation, which was incorporated in 1865 and met at Saratoga Hall. Danskin's church was quite active. They had weekly meetings, a Sunday lyceum for children, and outdoor camp meetings that attracted as many as 2,000 people. His church existed until about 1909, but Baltimore had other spiritualist churches by that time. A fellow spiritualist rightly called Danskin the father of Baltimore spiritualism. I came across correspondence between Danskin and spirit medium Oxted W. Sprague from 1857 when he invited her to come to Baltimore. Danskin also invited mediums Cora Hatch, Nettie Colburn, the Davenport brothers, and many others to speak in Baltimore. Danskin was a frequent contributor to the Banner of Light. Danskin himself became a medium, as did his wife Sarah. Sarah practiced as a healing medium guided by the spirit of Revolutionary War era physician Dr. Benjamin Rush. As a medium, Washington Danskin was visited by the spirit of Edgar Allan Poe. Poe dictated a poem to him called The Christian's Pit for the Damned, where Poe told him that hell did not exist. His grandson died in May 1861. This obituary described the passing as a spiritual birth and said the boy passed from earth to the home of freedom. Spiritualists looked at death as a transition to a place they called Summerland. Spiritualist mourners would sometimes wear white at funerals to honor the transition of their loved one. Gravestone inscriptions sometimes included spiritualist language. When Washington Danskin died in 1881, the Baltimore American reported, the solemn black was not worn, and the crepe upon the door was of a light color. So back to the Davenport brothers. They set the tone for this later style of spiritualism. As I mentioned, the manifestations became more elaborate. Manifestations included the ringing of bells, the sounds of musical instruments, and ghost-like materializations. There were also spirit writings, drawings, and photography. This caused some to question the authenticity of these manifestations. In some cities, spiritualists were treated as outright frauds. In 1885, 2 Baltimore City policemen arrested 2 fortune tellers, one of whom claimed to be a medium. Just 3 years later, Margaret Fox appeared at the New York Academy of Music to reveal the rappings of the Fox sisters were fake. However, she quickly retracted the confession, saying she had been paid to give it. Baltimore spiritualists continued to defend their religion. In 1895, 2 lecturers posted a placard declaring fraud, fraud, fraud on Rains Hall, the site of frequent spiritualist meetings. On the evening of May 28, 1895, the lecturers demonstrated a cabinet manifestation. A crowd of angry spiritualists disrupted the exhibition, some of them threatening to have the men arrested. And before we move on, if you're interested in learning about spiritualists in Baltimore, I will be having a cemetery tour in Greenmount Cemetery. Registration is already full, but again, you can ask to be placed on the wait list. I have found a lot of people buried in Greenmount. So, a lot of spiritualists buried in Greenmount. Thank you. So I hope I've made it clear that Baltimore was, for some people, a town that welcomes spiritualists. This might explain why Baltimore had a hand in producing the best-known spirit talking board, the Ouija Board. So why was it necessary to invent a talking board? Recall that mediums didn't go to divinity school to discover they had the knack of contacting spirits. They found out by just trying it. Spiritualist newspapers published instructions on how to form and run a circle or seance. The spirits used different means of communication. Some spirits simply used the voice of the entranced medium. Some spirits directed the hand of the medium in writing or drawing. Some spirits used rapping or knocking as a way to talk to the living. Rapping posed the biggest challenge for interpretation. Unless a medium just wanted answers to yes or no questions, there could be some real logistical obstacles to overcome. So let's go back to Washington A. Danskin. He wrote a book called How and Why I Became a Spiritualist, published in 1858. In it, he talked about his own experiences in spirit circles, and this is a quote. Through the magnetism emanating from the medium, vibrations or tipping of the table were produced. And while one of us would repeat the alphabet slowly, the communicating spirit would move the table at the appropriate letters, which being recorded would be found to form words and sentences. Well, obviously, this method was time-consuming. One tool that was used to interpret spirit raps was the dial. Francis Hopkinson Smith, a member of Danskin Circle, described the dial. Imagine the face of a clock with its minute hand, but instead of the figures, you have the letters of the alphabet. Around its axis is drawn a cord. The tipping of the table draws the cord and causes the hand to revolve, pointing to the letters. This device was used in Baltimore, but was not known to other spiritualists until Smith described it in the Banner of Light in 1858. Another tool used to facilitate spirit communication was the planchette. This was invented in France and began to be sold in the United States in the 1860s. You probably recognize the planchette as part of the Ouija board, but this actually worked a little bit differently. The small hole at the tip of the heart held a pencil to make it easier for the spirits to direct the medium's hand when writing. The talking board originated in Ohio. In 1866, someone in northern Ohio wrote the New York Daily Tribune with instructions on how to make an alphabet board that could be used with a planchette. This article was shared in newspapers around the country. Manufacturers looked to cash in on the talking board craze. The W.S. Reed Toy Company in Massachusetts was the first to manufacture a talking board in 1886. There were also other companies who made spirit boards, but now I'll be talking about the Ouija board because of its connection to Baltimore. So I'll give you the version of the story that makes the most sense to me, but understand there is some controversy here. Charles Kennard owned a fertilizer business in Chestertown, Maryland. His office was adjacent to the business of undertaker and furniture maker E.C. Reich. He asked Reich to make a spirit board for him. Neighbors showed interest in the board. Kennard then moved to Baltimore to look for investors to manufacture his spirit board. In 1890, Kennard met attorney Elijah Bond. Bond was interested in the talking board because his sister-in-law, Helen Peters, was a spirit medium. Peters and Bond lived in the same boarding house, the Langham Hotel at 529 North Charles Street. One night at a seance, Charles Kennard remarked, "We had not yet settled upon a name, and as the board had helped us in other ways, we would ask it to propose one. It spelled out O-U-I-J-A. When I asked the meaning of the word, it said, 'Good luck.' Yes, which I'm not sure what that really meant in that context. Miss Peters thereupon withdrew from her neck a chain which had at the end a locket, on it the figure of a woman, and at the top the word Ouija. We asked her if she had thought of this name, and she said she had not. We then adopted the word." So this is one of the very few places associated with Baltimore spiritualism I have found that still actually exists. It is now a 7-Eleven right on Charles Street. And here's a plaque you can see inside the store. You can easily walk to this store from here. And this is the plaque. So Bond made improvements to the design and patented it in 1891. Bond incorporated a company called the Kennard Novelty Company and gave $500 in financing. He had the trademark for the board issued to this company. Kennard left the company 14 months after it started. One of the partners, Washington Bowie, renamed the company the Ouija Novelty Company. In 1897, Bowie leased the rights to manufacture the board to William Fuld and his brother Isaac. William had joined the company at a young age, working his way up to a foreman and stockholder. By 1901, a feud had erupted between the brothers. They established separate businesses, still selling talking boards. Isaac's board looked exactly like William's Ouija board, but he renamed it the Oriole. William sued Isaac, and the case was not settled until 1919, when William was given the right to continue to use the name Ouija for his board. This lawsuit got much media coverage, and everyone involved sent letters to the Baltimore Sun pleading their own case. Kennard wrote saying he was the inventor. Reich's son wrote saying that his late father was the true inventor. The spirits gave their own opinion in 1939 when a spiritualist using the board asked for the real identity of the inventor. The spirits told him it was William Fuld. But as we've seen, the idea of a talking board had already been widely publicized before Reich, Bond, or the Full brothers had anything to do with the Ouija. Although some used the board as a toy, some still used the board as a spiritualist tool. The Ouija board was advertised in the Spiritualist newspaper, The Banner of Light, and was used in Spiritualist camp meetings. The board even produced a best-selling author. In fact, I believe even more than one best-selling author. In 1913, St. Louis housewife Pearl Curran tried using the board. She was contacted by a spirit named Patience Worth, a woman who purportedly lived in New England in the 1600s. Patience began dictating poems and novels to Mrs. Curran, and many found critical acclaim. Parapsychologists investigated the authenticity of her work, but they did not entirely succeed in discrediting her. Some critics attacked the use of the Ouija board, claiming it encouraged use of black magic and threatened Christianity. Many asked for the Ouija for advice. After all, it was called the mystifying oracle. During the early part of the 20th century, it was not unusual to read that women sought divorces based on the advice of their talking boards. Couples also used it as an opportunity to get close on a night out. Fuld himself did not believe in the power of the Ouija, but he did make a lot of money selling the board. In 1920, he built a new factory at 1508 Hartford Avenue. This is actually a building that still exists also. It's a city landmark. It's now being used as senior housing. William Fuld died on February 24th, 1927, after a fall from the roof of the building. He was overseeing the replacement of a flagpole. He was buried in Cedar Hill Cemetery in Anne Arundel County. Elijah Bond died in 1921 and was buried in Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore City. Thanks to Robert Murch of the Talking Board Historical Society, he has a unique memorial marker. And by the way, some of the information and images from this part of the program are from his websites, the Talking Board Historical Society and williamfuld.com. So now we're going to talk about the history of stage magic in Baltimore, but remember, we are still looking at this history through a spiritualist lens. Magic in Baltimore has a long history. The first record of a magician's performance in Baltimore was in 1787 when Signor Falcone performed at the Old Theater. The first modern stage magician was, and I will slaughter this name, Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin from France. Robert Houdin began performing in 1845, a few years before the Fox sisters began demonstrations of their spirit wrappings. He dressed the way some magicians dress today, in a black tailcoat with a top hat. As far as I know, he never traveled to Baltimore, but his Scottish rival did. Remember Professor Anderson and his criticism of the Fox sisters? In his final letter of April 7th, 1853, he closed, "I trust that the public will not think that I seek notoriety or gain by this expose. I trust in God that I may be the humble instrument in saving many from lunacy or death." Well, I discovered that things were not as they seem with Professor Anderson. In doing background research for this program, I discovered his real identity. He was John Henry Anderson, a magician also known as the Wizard of the North. Anderson was hardly an altruist in denouncing the Fox sisters. He was looking for publicity for his Grande Soirée Magique at the Holiday Street Theater. He promised, quote, "awe-inspiring feats of necromancy meant to expose the fallacy of witchcraft, demonology, psychology, and the more modern ism, spiritualism." Magicians made Baltimore a stop on their tours during the age of vaudeville from around the 1880s through the Depression. I'll be discussing the three most prominent magicians of this era: Harry Keller, Howard Thurston, and Harry Houdini. None were from Baltimore, but all three made multiple appearances here and had connections with amateur magicians in Baltimore. Harry Keller, born as Heinrich Keller, was born in Erie, Pennsylvania in 1849. At the age of 10, he went to work in a pharmacy. One day, he blew a hole in the floor of the building because he was playing with chemicals. So he ran away from home. He was taken in by a minister in upstate New York where he saw a magic show by the Fakir of Ava. He became the magician's assistant. In 1869, he left to become an assistant to the Davenport brothers. As you recall, the Davenports were spirit mediums known for their manifestations from a spirit cabinet. After 4 years, Keller left to perform magic with another Davenport assistant, William Fay. In 1875, Fay went back to the Davenports, and Keller continued performing on his own. Once Keller left the Davenports, he worked as a magician, not as a medium. Fay and Keller would stage seances as part of their act, and eventually Keller became known for his tricks using the spirit cabinet. In at least one case, Keller went back to the Spiritualists to earn his bread. In 1879, he visited Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. to perform magic, but that didn't sell many tickets. So he advertised a spiritualist lecture, which proved to be more lucrative. Even Keller's posters give one the impression, without explicitly saying so, that dark forces might be assisting him in his magical acts. In the 1880s and 1890s, spiritualism was coming under increased scrutiny. Philadelphia philanthropist Henry Siebert was a believer. When he died in 1883, he endowed a chair in philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania with the condition that a commission of scientists would investigate the truth of spiritualism. One thing the commission investigated was spirit writing, which was done on small slates. That's what that is a picture of. Harry Keller appeared before the commission to demonstrate how the sleight of hand of a magician could produce the same results. Keller made several appearances in Baltimore. Here's a program from Ford's Theater in 1899. There's a trick here, the Casadega propaganda, that used a smaller version of the spirit cabinet. By the way, Casadega is the name of a spiritualist camp in Florida. During the latter part of the 19th century, magicians aspired to great magician status. Audiences seemed to accept only one magician at a time as great. The previous great magician was Alexander Hermann, a French magician simply known as Hermann the Great. When he died in 1896, Keller took this role. By 1905, Keller was looking to retire and designate a successor. Fellow magicians speculated this would be Paul Valadon, a magician who had worked with Keller. After Keller's Baltimore performance in 1907, Baltimore magic historian and amateur magician Henry Ridgely Evans wrote in a British magic publication, "If you ask me, I say Howard Thurston. By all means, I predict that upon Thurston, Keller's mantle will fall." As Keller's friend, Evans may have had some inside information. Baltimore can proudly boast its part in magic history. On May 16, 1908, at Ford's Theater in Baltimore, Harry Keller passed his wand and mantle to Howard Thurston. Baltimore magician Thomas Worthington wrote, "In his adieu to the spectators, Professor Keller rested his arm affectionately on the shoulders of the younger man. Tears dimmed Keller's eyes as he walked off the stage." Keller did not lose the opportunity to persuade Baltimoreans that spiritualism was a fraud. In this last performance, he demonstrated how mediums cause tables to rap, produce spirit writing on slates, and other fraudulent manifestations. So who was this new great magician, Howard Thurston? Like Keller, Thurston came from humble beginnings. He was born in 1869 in Columbus, Ohio. Shortly after Thurston saw the show of Hermann the Great, he ran away from home. You see a theme there. He began riding the rails and worked as a newsboy on trains, eventually earning enough money to buy magical equipment. In New York City, he joined a gang of pickpockets, but he was caught. William Round, secretary of the New York Prison Association, sentenced him to 3 weeks in jail. And actually, this was his first big break. Round helped him enroll in a Christian school, but Thurston left without graduating. Round then got him a job at a reform school in upstate New York. However, Thurston saw Hermann again. He bought a train ticket to the next city where Hermann was performing. From there, Thurston began working as a magician, performing at carnivals and dime museums. In 1899, he arrived in New York City and began performing in vaudeville. He then traveled to London to perform at the Palace Theatre, where Houdini had already performed. Like Houdini, he came away a star. Thurston resolved to make his show into a great, elaborate spectacle like Hermann's. He left for Australia, China, and India. Though he started this tour penniless, he returned to the States with $50,000 he had earned from performing. Keller and Thurston met over dinner in May 1907 when Thurston signed a contract to acquire Keller's magical equipment for $7,000. This is how Thurston became worthy of Keller's mantle. As we've seen, Baltimore was a place friendly to spiritualists in the 19th century. From the late 19th and early decades of the 20th century, Baltimore was also friendly to magicians. Magic clubs were popping up in many American cities, and several national and international organizations of magicians were established during this time. The second magic club founded in the United States was the Society of the Sphinx, founded by Baltimorean Henry Ridgely Evans in 1902. This club vanished after a few months after the Society of American Magicians was founded in New York City. Evans's founding of the Society of the Sphinx indicated that amateur magicians were already active in Baltimore, and clearly Evans had connections with the larger community of magicians. So let's talk for a moment about Henry Ridgely Evans. Evans was born in Baltimore in 1861. He was a librarian who worked for the United States Department of Education. He was a prolific writer, writing at least 14 books on the history of magic. Evans also had an interest in spiritualism and the occult. Evans exposed spiritualist manifestations in his book, Hours with the Ghosts. Here's Evans's recreation of a spirit photograph. He discussed in detail Keller's testimony before the Siebert Commission. But interestingly, Evans also said some manifestations may have been effective because of the audience's suggestibility and the medium's telepathic abilities, rather than medium's use of trickery. His books may have had a bigger influence than you might imagine. This book was reissued as The Spirit World Unmasked and was offered in the Sears catalog right alongside books on astrology and hypnotism. So, as I mentioned, magicians sometimes revealed the methods of spirit mediums, but these revelations could have been problematic for magicians because some mediums were using the same methods as the conjurers themselves. Magic clubs asked magicians to not reveal the secrets behind their effects. When Evans founded the Society of the Sphinx, he asked members to pledge not to expose even the simplest trick or illusion on the public stage. Of course, these clubs also served a social function. Magician Arthur D. Gans founded the Society of Baltimore Magicians on February 22, 1911. Charles Ziegler, who was vice president, renamed it the Demons Club of Baltimore Magicians in December of the same year. The new name definitely captured the flavor of the magic of that era. Arthur Gans, founder of the Demons, worked as a reporter for the Baltimore American. In 1920, began working for the B&O Railroad as an exhibitor of safety pictures. Like some of the other demons, he corresponded with other magicians, some of them famous. Another founding member of the Demons was Thomas Chew Worthington, who was born in 1879. Worthington graduated from the Maryland Institute and became a salesman for a distributor of X-ray and photographic equipment. Worthington was introduced to magic by his grandfather. At the age of 7, he saw Hermann the Great perform in Baltimore. Worthington was the magician who witnessed the passing of the mantle at Ford's in 1908. He became friends with Howard Thurston. Worthington could escape from within seconds from a locked trunk, and he also sometimes performed in costume. That's what this is. He developed relationships with famous magicians and was able to acquire items from Alexander Hermann, Harry Keller, Howard Thurston, and others. He even owned Keller's spirit cabinet and Robert Houdin's wand. Worthington wanted to build a temple of magic in Baltimore to house his collection, but this never came to pass. When he died in 1953, the collection was donated to the Ringley Museum in Florida. Some items from this collection are now at the Egyptian Hall Museum, a private magic museum in California. Worthington also had other interests. He collected natural history specimens, and he also collected photographs. He donated his photograph collection to the Enoch Pratt Free Library and also to the Maryland Center for History and Culture. And this is one of his photographs of the Great Fire of Baltimore from 1904. Worthington did not like the idea of any magic club that permitted non-magicians to join. In 1923, Worthington, along with 2 other Demons Club members, founded the Society of Osiris, a magicians-only club. Another founding member of the Demons Club was Charles Fulton Orsler, who was born in Baltimore in 1893. Here he is in this photo of the Demons Club from 1915. You can see him sitting next to Thomas Worthington and Howard Thurston, and the easy way to identify him is the man with the beard and the mustache. That is Thomas Worthington, and he's sitting to his right, to our eye, sitting to the left. He remained a magician, but became better known as an editor, playwright, and author of detective novels. Orsler was the only member of the Demons who published books exposing the methods of spirit mediums. And hint, we will be seeing him later. So what made the Demons Club so remarkable? They were the second oldest magic club in the world. The Demons Club was the only magic club with its own clubhouse located in West Baltimore. The building had a stage made from the wood from the stage at Ford's Theater, where Keller had passed the mantle to Thurston. Several famous magicians performed on the Demons stage, including Harry Blackstone Sr., Howard Thurston, Harry Houdini, and Henry Ridgely Evans. There are several photographs and newspaper accounts of the Demons Club annual dinners with Howard Thurston. The first dinner, given in Thurston's honor, was in March 1914. The Sun reported that rabbits leaped from the pockets of unsuspecting waiters, ducks came quacking from the folds of their jackets, and real eggs rolled from their cars. Our photograph is from the second Demons Club dinner in 1915. I believe this is at the Lord Baltimore Hotel. Long past his retirement, Keller continued his friendship with the Demons Club. Here's a Christmas card from Keller from 1919. So the early decades of the 20th century brought a world war and global pandemic, and people were even more interested in communicating with the dead. At the same time, Keller, Thurston, and Houdini grew in prominence. Baltimore still had spiritualist churches, at least 5 spiritualist churches in the late 19th century. Baltimore's theaters continued to host a few spirit mediums. Medium Anna Eva Fay came to Baltimore's Auditorium Theater in 1916. Actually, she had appeared in Baltimore as early as 1876. She was a medium and mentalist who used magic to convince audiences of her clairvoyant abilities. In 1913, she was accepted to a British Magicians Club, the Magic Circle, as its first honorary lady associate. Like female magician or female mediums before her, Fay promoted women's rights. The archenemy of the Spiritualists also came to visit in 1916, Harry Houdini. He was born in 1874 as Eric or Erich Weitz. His family immigrated to Wisconsin, then moved to New York City in 1886, where his father started a Jewish religious school. While working at a necktie factory, Erich met a friend who was interested in magic. He read the memoirs of Robert Houdin and renamed himself Houdini in Robert Houdin's honor. At the age of 17, Erich left the factory with his friend and they to work as magicians. This friend quit not much long after, and Houdini's brother Theo became his partner. Eventually, Theo and Harry would perform separately. Houdini performed at dime museums in Manhattan, where he met his wife, Bess. They performed a trick called metamorphosis, where Harry would escape from a locked trunk. Once he escaped, Bess would be found in his place. In 1897, he joined a traveling medicine show. The proprietor sold snake oil during the day, and the troupe would perform at night at the local opera house. Houdini was asked to add a Sunday seance to the show. Houdini used his escape skills to create manifestations for his seances, but he learned other tricks of the medium trade. He visited cemeteries to gather names, read old newspaper files, and gathered gossip about important families. His career took off in 1899 when he began performing for the vaudeville circuit. There he was asked only to perform his escape effects. He then traveled to London, then toured Europe several times during the first decade of the 20th century. During this time, he perfected many kinds of escapes, such as from locked trunks, from handcuffs, and even from a locked milk can full of water. In the early days of his career, he did these escapes behind closed curtains. Houdini's brother was challenged to a straitjacket escape in 1904. He decided to do it in full sight, which added to the dramatic effect. Houdini also began performing many of his escapes in plain sight. In 1913, Houdini's mother died. This was a death he took hard. He returned to the States and began an all-magic tour, which was panned. He went back to his escape routines. To attract an audience for his shows, he began performing his straitjacket escape suspended in mid-air out in the open. This drew huge crowds. Houdini performed this stunt in Baltimore on April 26, 1916. He chose to do this in front of the Sun Building at the corner of Charles and Baltimore Streets. Of course, doing this trick in front of a newspaper building ensured press coverage. Houdini performed this feat in front of a crowd of 50,000, probably the largest number ever assembled on a downtown street in Baltimore. He completely freed himself in 1 minute and 55 seconds. So we're going to go a bit more chronologically now. This performance took place before Houdini was really concerned with spiritualism. He was still performing in vaudeville. Magician routines in vaudeville tended to be somewhat short. Before the mid-20s, the magician who was doing a full evening of magic in the tradition of Keller was Howard Thurston. To give you a flavor of Thurston's show, here's a program from Baltimore's Ford's Theater when he came in 1922. In this performance, Thurston used magical means to answer the question, do spirits return? Thurston never made any claim that the spirits were helping him, but his marvels had a spiritualistic flair. He made spirit paintings on a blank canvas, caused a phantom piano to play, and endowed an automaton vampire with life. The levitation of Princess Karnak was his most famous effect. Levitation was an effect done by many past magicians using various methods. But during this era, levitation definitely had spiritualist associations. In seances, tables would mysteriously rise. The famous British medium Daniel Hume, it was reported, could levitate himself across the seance room and out the window. The Sun declared the levitation of Princess Karnak the most beautiful and inexplicable of Thurston's features. Thurston said his object was to mystify and entertain, and he wouldn't deceive you for the world. Eventually, Houdini would accuse Thurston of being a spiritualist, perhaps because Thurston actually allowed for the possibility of communication with spirits, but also exposed fraud if he saw it. Thurston, however, would never match Houdini's zeal in attacking spirit mediums. Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, was a believer and toured the United States to lecture on spiritualism in 1923. Houdini befriended Doyle and began visiting seances with him. Lady Doyle invited Houdini to a seance where Houdini's mother was contacted, but the magician remained skeptical. Scientists wanted to investigate the validity of the messages from beyond. In December 1922, the Scientific American magazine announced a $5,000 reward for conclusive psychic manifestations. Mediums will be investigated under controlled conditions, observed by scientists and by Houdini himself. These mediums could materialize flowers and live birds, play instruments, receive voices through spirit trumpets, and exude a mysterious substance called ectoplasm from every orifice of their body. Several mediums agreed to the tests, but none were deemed worthy of the prize. In 1924, Houdini published his book, A Magician Among the Spirits, which ended his friendship with Doyle. Houdini continued his crusade. He began lecturing against spiritualism across the United States. The next season, Houdini developed his first full evening magic show in the tradition of Hermann and Keller. Houdini started his season at the Maryland Theater in Cumberland in Western Maryland. The show had 3 acts: magic, feats of escape, and exposures of spiritualism. In November, Houdini came back to Baltimore. The Baltimore News ran stories about this appearance with some very aggressive headlines. Houdini on trail of Baltimore seers, Houdini to expose Baltimore frauds, and Houdini on warpath against seers. A few months later, Houdini appeared before the United States House of Representatives, testifying for the ban of fortune-telling in Washington, D.C. Despite extensive publicity, the bill did not pass. As you might imagine, Houdini was not making friends with the spiritualists. Houdini went even further with his attacks. During his 1925 tour, he brought with him a group of mostly female undercover investigators to visit local mediums. He also had a few magicians who assisted him in exposing fraudulent mediums. One of them, Samory Frickel, had published a book debunking spiritualism. Well, Samory Frickel was not the person he seemed to be. This book was actually written by former Demons Club member Fulton Orsler. In October 1926, Orsler received a letter from S. Malcolm Bird of the Psychical Research Society. Bird quoted spirit medium Alice Wood, who reported, "The waters are black for Houdini, and Houdini's days as a magician are over." This is one of many threatening messages received by mediums regarding Houdini. A few weeks later, Houdini visited McGill University in Montreal to speak about spiritualism. A student visited him backstage, asking if it was true he could withstand any blow to the stomach. The student punched Houdini before he could tense his muscles. Houdini continued to Detroit, where he collapsed after performing. He died of a ruptured appendix on October 31st, 1926. Some claim that spiritualists may have had something to do with his death. Whether this is true is debatable, but Houdini feared the spiritualists enough that he began carrying a gun, and he had actually advised Orsler to do the same. Houdini had made a compact with his wife and friends that he would try to communicate from the other side after his death. The last official Houdini seance was held 10 years after his death without a word from the spirit of Houdini. Houdini's death marked the beginning of the end of an era in magic. Vaudeville was waning, partly because of the popularity of motion pictures. The Depression also struck a serious blow to live entertainment. Still, Howard Thurston continued to perform, making appearances in Baltimore. In 1933, he was honored at a dinner hosted by the Society of Osiris at the Lord Baltimore Hotel to recognize the 25th anniversary of the passing of the mantle. Among the guests were the mayor of Baltimore, Thomas Worthington, and Henry Ridgely Evans. Thurston was presented with a wand made from wood from Ford's Theater. This wand has been passed from magician to this day as a sacred artifact. Thurston made his last appearance in Baltimore in October 1934 when he suffered a heart attack at the Century Theater. Worthington visited him backstage. Thurston said, "Tom, you are the only one in this world who really cares for me and the only one who will care a damn when I am gone." Thurston died of a stroke on April 13th, 1936. Worthington and Thurston had corresponded extensively over many years, and Worthington preserved all of Thurston's letters. He also published a book of his memories of Thurston and honored his friend by commissioning a bronze emblem inscribed to Thurston from the Society of Osiris, which is still on Thurston's grave in Ohio. I was very fortunate to meet magician Rory Feldman, who collects Thurston memorabilia. Many of the images you are seeing are part of his collection. Spiritualism began to lose its grip on the public imagination, though some spiritualist churches remain active to this day. But magic in Baltimore continued to flourish. The Demons Club eventually became the Keller Thurston Assembly No. 6 of the Society of American Magicians, an assembly which is still active. The Society of Osiris is not active, but still has 4 living members. They sponsored 2 magic clubs for young magicians, the Disciples of Osiris and the Pyramid Club. These clubs nurtured the next generation of magicians, including Phil Thomas, who started a magic shop in Baltimore, and Milburn Christopher, Baltimore's most famous magician. Christopher authored many books on the history of magic and psychic phenomena, some of which I used to do research for this program. After the Depression, magicians no longer emphasized spiritualism in their acts. But now there are magicians who practice a genre of magic called bizarre magic, which focuses on storytelling and uses elements of horror and the supernatural. Some bizarre magicians even conduct seances. So let's go back to my earlier question. Why did magicians want to discredit spiritualists? Houdini justified his crusade by pointing out that some people spent large sums of money to speak to the dead. A few even committed suicide in hopes of joining their loved ones in Summerland. But scholars have speculated that magicians and mediums were competing for the same audiences, but as I've shown, some magicians actually worked as mediums at times. So I asked a different question. Why were magicians of this era interested in spiritualism? I found a hint of an answer in this book, The Secret History of Magic by Peter Lamont and Jim Steinmeier. They asserted, the world is a more magical place than we generally think. There is a hidden world inhabited by what we cannot see and do not suspect. There is a secret world beyond the questions that we ask. I believe magicians may have believed spiritualism offered them a lens to see into that realm. Magicians use sleight of hand and misdirection to make the impossible possible, to bend our perceptions. Aside from duping the grieving, why might mediums have used these same skills? One medium, Annie Benninghofen, admitted to Houdini, I really believed in spiritualism all the time I was practicing it, but I thought I was justified in helping the spirits out. They couldn't float a trumpet around the room. I did it for them. They couldn't speak, so I spoke for them. I thought I was justified in trickery, because through trickery I could get more converts to what I thought was a good and beautiful religion. I'll leave you with this thought. Were mediums, magicians, and those who use talking boards tapping into the same thing, a very human desire to feel awe and wonder and to confront death, the great unknown. And then finally, before I end, I wanted to say thank you to all of those who very generously helped me. This program would not have been possible without their help. And that's my way to contact me. And thank you very much for being so attentive. And we do have some time for questions if anybody has any. I know it's a lot of information, and maybe a lot of information that none of you knew about. I don't know. Oh, no? Oh, I don't mean to be calling on people. Okay. All right, well, okay. Okay, we have two people. Okay, you first.
Do you have a favorite magic trick you've read about?
I don't know. I don't know. I really like that photograph of the levitation of Princess Karnak. And if you look carefully at it, it does sort of look like early Photoshop. I'm not sure how he really did it in real life. I just think that in general, like the old magic shows, I love reading about them. I think that it was a lot of theater, not just magic. And that kind of, I don't know, to me, that seems like an era that doesn't exist anymore. So I don't know. And you had a question also.
Could you just repeat the last thing you said of the human desire to confront death?
Right.
Just repeat it. I just missed what you said.
I have to go back.
Remember.
Okay. Well, okay. So we're mediums, magicians, and those who use talking boards tapping into the same thing, a very human desire to feel awe and wonder and to confront death, the great unknown. I don't know. I think, was it in Hamlet? I think that Shakespeare called death the undiscovered country. Yeah. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
What was the relationship with the Christianity of the time and the spiritualism?
Oh, that's a good question. The Catholic Church in Baltimore was a big thing. It's still a big thing, although not all of the story of the history of religion in Baltimore. That's one thing I've learned through this research. In the 1860s, I know that they had, because we're a very important archdiocese for the country. I think it's the oldest archdiocese in the country. And a lot of convocations and plenary councils were held in Baltimore in the 19th century. And in the 1860s, they actually had a plenary council, I forget which one it was, where they officially condemned spiritualism as being demonic. So that's one thing. I see also like a lot of newspaper ads, they're, for like religious, goings on. Sometimes you will see where somebody, like a pastor in another church, might be giving a, like a sermon attacking spiritualism. But on the other hand, some of the spiritualist churches in Baltimore in the 19th century would say, we would especially like to invite pastors from other religions to our services. So I guess there was some, a little bit of a dispute there. And I will say this, I think it was last year in the, was it the Catholic Review, the local newspaper here in Baltimore? They actually had an article last year about the Ouija board being like basically demonic. And I think they talked about like one of the priests from the basilica showed up and was like sprinkling holy water on the sidewalk in front of the 7-Eleven. So I guess that gives you an idea. So not everyone really accepted it, but I mean, these spiritualists considered themselves to be Christians. That's not to say that other Christians thought that what they were doing was great. Any last questions? It's a good question. I will throw another piece of information out there just and it's random. It really is random. I was very curious to see whether the African American community in Baltimore had any interest in this also. And I think that there is a chance that they did. And recently I saw some it was a WPA survey of churches in Baltimore. They're at the Maryland State Archives, and I wanted to see the ones for the Spiritualist churches. So this is from the mid-1930s. Almost all, I think it was about 10 records of Spiritualist churches were in that collection, and almost all of them were colored churches and with women pastors. And I would love to know that story. That's a whole avenue of research I haven't even touched yet, but I think that it's fascinating and pretty intriguing. So, well, again, thank you for listening. And if you have more questions, you can visit me later. If you want to be added to the cemetery tour list, let me know that too. So, yes.